The streets were adorned with heart-shaped decorations, and the air was filled with the scent of roses as Valentine's Day approached. Couples strolled hand in hand, lost in the intoxicating allure of romance. But for me, Valentine's Day held a different significance, a reminder of a harrowing experience that would forever haunt my memories. It began like any other Valentine's Day, with a sense of anticipation tinged with nervousness. I had planned a romantic evening for my partner, eager to sweep them off their feet with a candlelit dinner and heartfelt gestures. Little did I know that the night would descend into a nightmare of terror and despair. As dusk settled, I made my way to the quaint little restaurant where I had booked a table for two. The ambiance was enchanting, with soft lighting and the gentle hum of conversation weaving through the air. I anxiously awaited my partner's arrival, a bouquet of red roses clutched tightly in my hand. Minutes turned into hours, and still there was no sign of my beloved. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind as I tried to reach them, only to be met with silence. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, a foreboding sense of something gone horribly wrong. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, I set out to find them, my heart pounding with each step. The streets, once teeming with lovers, now felt desolate and ominous under the cover of night. I called out their name, my voice echoing into the emptiness, but received no response. Then, I saw it. A single red rose lying abandoned on the ground, its petals trampled underfoot. Dread coiled in the depths of my being as I followed the trail of discarded flowers, each one a grim testament to the horrors that awaited me. The trail led me to an old, decrepit building at the edge of town, a place long abandoned and forgotten by the passage of time. The air was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breaths. With trembling hands, I pushed open the rusted door and stepped inside. What greeted me was a scene straight out of a nightmare. The walls were adorned with blood-red graffiti, the air heavy with the stench of decay. In the center of the room, a figure stood, their back turned to me, their body swaying with an otherworldly rhythm. With a sense of mounting dread, I approached the figure, my heart hammering in my chest. As they turned to face me, I recoiled in horror, their once familiar features twisted into a grotesque mask of madness. Their eyes, once filled with love, now glowed with an unholy light. Before I could react, they lunged at me with inhuman speed, their nails digging into my flesh with a ferocity that defied reason. I screamed, the sound echoing through the empty halls as I fought desperately for my life. But the figure was relentless, their grip unyielding as they dragged me deeper into the darkness. Hours passed in a blur of pain and terror, each moment stretching into eternity as I battled against the forces of darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the nightmare ended. The figure vanished into thin air, leaving me battered and broken on the cold, hard ground. As I emerged from that accursed building, Valentine's Day had taken on a new meaning, a day not of love and romance, but of horror and despair. And though I survived to tell the tale, the scars that remained served as a grim reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the most seemingly innocent of days. Valentine's Day, a day of love and romance, or so they say. But for me, it turned out to be a nightmarish descent into terror that shattered any notion of romance forever. It was supposed to be a perfect evening. I had meticulously planned every detail to sweep my partner off their feet. A candlelit dinner at our favorite restaurant, followed by a moonlit stroll along the riverbank. But fate had other plans in store for us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I arrived at the restaurant, heart pounding with excitement. But as the minutes stretched into hours, my excitement turned to anxiety. Where was my partner? Why hadn't they shown up? Frantic calls and text messages went unanswered, leaving me with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. Finally, unable to wait any longer, I set out to find them. The city streets were deserted, save for the occasional passerby hurrying home to their loved ones. But there was no sign of my partner, no trace of their whereabouts. Then, as if guided by some unseen force, I found myself drawn to an old, abandoned building at the edge of town. It loomed before me like a silent sentinel, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. With a sense of trepidation, I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the silence was deafening. I called out my partner's name, my voice echoing off the walls, but there was no response. As I ventured deeper into the building, I stumbled upon a scene straight out of a nightmare. A dim light flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. And there, in the center of the room, stood my partner, or what was left of them. Their body was contorted in unnatural ways, their eyes glazed over with an otherworldly emptiness. Horrified, I rushed to their side, but it was too late. Whatever had taken hold of them had already claimed their soul. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the darkness, a guttural, inhuman sound that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a grotesque creature with twisted features and eyes that burned with a malevolent light. In that moment, I knew I was face to face with true evil. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I fled from the building, the echoes of my partner's screams haunting me as I ran. But the nightmare was far from over. As I emerged into the cold night air, I realized that I was not alone. Shadows lurked in every corner, whispering sinister secrets and beckoning me to join them in their eternal torment. With nowhere else to turn, I sought refuge in the safety of my own home. But even there, I could not escape the horrors that had befallen me. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows seemed to be a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the threshold. And so, as the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, I knew that my life would never be the same again. Valentine's Day, once a celebration of love and happiness, had become a nightmare from which I could never awaken, a day forever tainted by the horrors that had unfolded in its wake. The soft glow of streetlights bathed the city in a romantic ambiance as Valentine's Day approached. Couples walked hand in hand, exchanging affectionate glances, while the air was perfumed with the scent of roses and anticipation. But for me, Valentine's Day held a different kind of horror, one that would forever taint the holiday of love. It began innocently enough. I had planned a surprise dinner date for my partner Emma at our favorite Italian restaurant. The reservation was set, the flowers were bought, and I could hardly contain my excitement as I imagined the look of delight on her face. As I sat in the cozy corner booth, nervously tapping my foot against the floor, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. Minutes turned to hours, and still, there was no sign of Emma. My calls went unanswered, and a sense of dread settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Finally, unable to wait any longer, I made my way to Emma's apartment, my heart pounding with each step. The streets were eerily quiet, devoid of the usual Valentine's Day buzz. It was as if the world had taken on a sinister hue, mirroring the turmoil in my own heart. Arriving at Emma's apartment building, I raced up the stairs to her floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway was dimly lit, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and contort with every passing moment. I knocked on Emma's door, my knuckles white with tension, but there was no response. Fear gripped me like a vice as I fumbled with the doorknob, pushing the door open with a trembling hand. The apartment was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides. "Emma?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the stillness. There was no answer, only the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing off the walls. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I stepped further into the apartment, the darkness swallowing me whole. And then, I saw her. A figure standing in the corner of the room, her back turned to me. Relief flooded through me at the sight of Emma's familiar silhouette, but it was short-lived. As she turned to face me, I recoiled in horror. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, were now empty sockets, pools of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around them. Her skin was pallid and mottled, stretched taut over skeletal features. She reached out to me with bony fingers, her mouth opening in a silent scream that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of the horrifying sight before me. This couldn't be Emma, my Emma, the love of my life. But there was no denying the truth staring me in the face. In a blind panic, I fled from the apartment. The image of Emma's twisted visage burned into my mind. Tears streamed down my face as I stumbled through the empty streets, the world around me spinning in a haze of fear and confusion. As the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness, I found myself sitting on a park bench, my body shaking with exhaustion and terror. Valentine's Day, a day meant to celebrate love and romance, had become a nightmare from which I could never awaken. And as I sat there, alone and broken, I couldn't help but wonder, what other horrors lay hidden beneath the facade of this seemingly innocent holiday? Valentine's Day, a time for love and romance, or so they say. But for Jenna and Ethan, it would be a night they would never forget, a night when the line between love and terror blurred into a nightmare. Jenna had spent weeks planning the perfect Valentine's Day surprise for Ethan. She had booked a cozy cabin nestled deep in the woods, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was meant to be a romantic getaway, just the two of them, surrounded by nature's tranquility. As they drove deeper into the forest, excitement buzzed between them. But as the trees closed in around them, a sense of unease crept into Jenna's heart. The darkness seemed to swallow the road ahead, and the wind whispered eerie secrets through the branches. Arriving at the cabin, Jenna tried to shake off her apprehension. The cabin was quaint and inviting, with a crackling fire and a bottle of wine waiting to be uncorked. But as night fell and shadows danced across the walls, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Ethan dismissed her fears as jitters, attributing them to the isolation of the cabin. But when strange noises echoed through the night, Jenna's anxiety reached a fever pitch. It sounded like footsteps outside the window, slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was watching them. As they lay in bed, the air thick with tension, a knock sounded at the door. Jenna's heart leapt into her throat, her pulse pounding in her ears. Ethan assured her it was probably just a tree branch tapping against the wood, but Jenna couldn't shake the feeling of dread that washed over her. The knocks grew louder and more insistent, echoing through the silent cabin like a drumbeat of doom. With trembling hands, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside to investigate, leaving Jenna alone in the darkness. Minutes stretched into eternity as Jenna waited, her heart hammering in her chest. And then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, shattering the stillness like glass. Jenna's blood ran cold as she rushed outside, the flashlight slipping from her grasp as she stumbled through the darkness. What she saw made her blood run cold. Ethan lay on the ground, his body twisted and broken, his eyes wide with terror, and standing over him, bathed in moonlight, was a figure cloaked in shadow, a figure that seemed to materialize from the very darkness itself. Jenna's scream echoed through the forest as she turned to run, her mind consumed by primal fear. Branches clawed at her skin, roots reached up to trip her, but still she ran, driven by a terror she could not comprehend. As she burst through the trees into the clearing, she saw the cabin engulfed in flames, the fire casting flickering shadows across the forest floor. And in the center of it all stood the figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, its twisted grin a mockery of humanity. With nowhere left to run, Jenna collapsed to her knees, her screams lost in the roar of the flames. And as the darkness closed in around her, she knew that this Valentine's Day would be one she would never forget. A night when love turned to horror and terror reigned supreme.